Good evening. Hey, this is my first mic check, so you guys can hear me, right? It's not overly loud? Okay, cool. All right. Hey, good evening. I am Ted Iber. I'm the executive director for the St. Louis Literary Award Program Series at St. Louis University. I love that I'm reading this. I am so excited to be here tonight to honor one of the finest writers in the world, a writer so popular that he's left an indelible mark in the worlds of literature, film, and television. In fact, just this morning, Time magazine released its 100 most influential people of 2023, and I think you can guess who's on the list. Tonight, we are here to honor the 2023 St. Louis Literary Award recipient and one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2023, Neil Gaiman. It's been an interesting couple of weeks for me, personally, as word got out that John Hamm was not going to be here, the original moderator for tonight's sit-down interview. He had to pull out due to a very tight production schedule, and I would have to sub in. And so I did what any competent and dynamic executive director does in this situation. They, of course, raise their hands and they say, "Excellent, I have to take John Hamm's place." I'm thinking, who wouldn't want to step in to the shoes of one of the most celebrated, talented, handsome, witty, and admired actors in Hollywood, particularly when he justifiably receives a hero's welcome every time he comes to his hometown? I don't think I've been on the receiving end of so much masked disappointment since, and then I realized, I know when, there actually was a time. There was one time. I gave my girlfriend, way back in the day, on a first date anniversary, something that I thought was really cool, a large, big, round palm frond basket-like thing that featured a rather ingenious flap in the front. I'd never seen anything like it, and I knew she'd love it. Her smile when I gave it to her was more of a retraction of lips with teeth, but she just said, "So what is it?" And I said, I just said, "Check it out." And she said, she turned it over, which I hadn't done, and she read it, and it said, "Authentic Ethiopian chicken coop." And then said nothing else. And so it was obvious that she didn't like the chicken coop, which I thought was just a basket with a cool flap in front, and it was apparently just a door to keep chickens in. Who knew? But wouldn't you know it, we ended up getting married and had two amazing daughters. They're out here, yep. And then years after that, when we were getting divorced, I said, so was it the chicken coop? And maybe she said, yeah, it was the chicken coop. Kind of a metaphor. So anyway, I realized that after yet more people told me today even how crushed they were that John Hamm would not be here. In fact, as recently as 5 minutes ago. And I thought, maybe a little perspective here to tie these two disappointments together. Neil, I don't know if you know this, he's mostly a pescatarian, not specifically, but mostly. And while it's quite a coup to have another exceptional writer join the pantheon of recipients of the St. Louis Literary Award list, maybe it's best that tonight there will be assuredly no chicken, most definitely no ham. You're stuck with me. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from the Sheldon Concert Hall tonight from St. Louis, Missouri, and I want to welcome not only our in-person audience here to this beautiful venue, but our online viewers from around the world to celebrate Neil Gaiman. I'm going to be your host and moderator tonight for the 55th Annual St. Louis Literary Award Program brought to you by St. Louis University Libraries. And while we're all here this evening to celebrate the astounding talent of Neil Gaiman, the pride of Hampshire, UK, we at SLU have actually been celebrating Neil all year. We've had 9 Neil Gaiman Campus Read book talks featuring scholars and artists from California, Michigan, New York, Ohio, London, Madrid, right here in St. Louis. You can catch all of those talks on our SLU YouTube page, by the way. It takes a team effort from various departments from around both SLU and Madrid campuses, or St. Louis and Madrid campuses. I want to take a minute to single out some of that team before we start our show this evening. Actually, we have started our show, just continuing on with our show. So I want to thank both our 2022 and 2023 St. Louis Literary Award selection teams, They are out here in the audience, for the huge number of hours they put in doing the research and the reading into our list of writers. A huge thanks to our Campus Read Committee, made up of faculty and staff from more than 30 departments from both campuses. This year we actually featured 2 Campus Read books, Stardust and The Graveyard Book, the latter winning an enormous number of prestigious awards. Individual thanks to sociology professor, member of the President's Circle, Dr. Fran Pistello, for being my wingwoman and advisor in all programming. Annalise Piven, who's back there right now, from our development department. Maggie Roderman in marketing and communications. Our Dean of Libraries, Jennifer Newtfall. SLU President Fred Pistello. And Provost Mike Lewis, Vice President of Student Development Sarah Cunningham. Director of the 1818 Dual Enrollment Program, Beth Collier. Tidy Projects Design, our student graphic design team led by Professor Martin Brief. They made your programs tonight, by the way. And one of our new partners, the St. Louis County Libraries, among the best public libraries in the nation. We are thrilled. I want to give a shout out from the rooftops to my exceptional student workers. Public Health Junior Emmy La, Integrated Strategic Communications with a Visual Design Emphasis Junior Ariana Magafis, School of Nursing Junior Shelley Q, PhD candidate in the School of Education Kate Essig, and third-year School of Medicine student Emily Duncan. Donna Neely, our library administrative assistant. I'd be sunk without her, and she is the glue of this program. Yep. Our sincere thanks to the Edward H. and Rosemary Young Fund of the St. Louis Community Foundation for their generous support every year. And to our other outstanding partners, Left Bank Books, Caldy's Coffee Roasting Company, and Apotheosis Comics and Lounge. We have a few speakers tonight, as you can see in your program, from St. Louis University, who will be talking briefly with you. First up, I'd like to introduce our Dean of Libraries, Jennifer Newtfall, who's had an extremely distinguished academic career, most recently from the University of Northern Colorado and Santa Clara University in California. We're thrilled that she's joined us here at SLU in 2022, so please welcome Jennifer Newtfall.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Newtfall. I'm the Dean of Libraries and Museums here at St. Louis University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 St. Louis Literary Awards ceremony as we honor Neil Gaiman. This is actually my first year in this role and at this ceremony, and I feel like we could have chose no one better. Tonight's the 55th St. Louis Awards ceremony, an award with honors some of the greatest writers from around the world. Among our most recent recipients include Margaret Atwood, Stephen Sondheim, Zadie Smith, and Aaron Dottie Roy. So the Literary Award and programs are part of the Libraries and Museums, an organization which includes our main library, our medical library, and 3 museums, the St. Louis University Museum of Art, or SLUMA, the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art, or MOCRA, and the Historic Couples House on campus. The mission of the libraries and museums is to engage in holistic educational and transformative experiences by providing exceptional programs and services, curating diverse exhibitions and collections, and fostering discovery and scholarship. And the Literary Award aligns with our mission, and we all are excited for tonight's exceptional program. I just want to take a minute, because I have the time, to just tell you briefly about some of the other accomplishments that are occurring in the libraries and museums. So for hopefully all you fellow art lovers out there, I encourage you to see our 2 newest exhibits. So at SLUMA, it's Exploring the Figure, featuring art, photographs, and objects from our personal collection, permanent collection. And at MOCRA, it's Cuentos Nueva Mexicanos. It's featuring folk art from 2 New Mexican artists that are inspired by New Mexican folk art. With funding from the School of Medicine, our Medical Center Library installed a state-of-the-art 360-degree classroom for interactive instruction for medical students and other health science users served by the medical library. Our instruction librarians from St. Louis and Madrid are collaborating to teach information literacy as part of the new core curriculum to all incoming students. And our Vatican Film Library developed a new digital collection of medieval manuscripts on canon and Roman law in support of the new SLU Center for Religious and Legal History. So those are some of the things taking place in the libraries and museums. But it's now my pleasure to introduce the president of St. Louis University, Dr. Fred Pistello. Dr. Pistello became the 33rd president of St. Louis University in 2014. As president, Dr. Pistello oversees one of the nation's leading Jesuit research universities with more than 13,000 students and 5,000 employees. Dr. Pistello has galvanized the university community around a compelling vision to be a global Jesuit university that is mission-focused, student and patient-centered, and research-driven, one that is working with the people of St. Louis to reimagine, transform, and unify our city. Under his leadership, SLU has grown its enrollment, expanded its research capacity and impact, launched a new core curriculum, and concluded a record-breaking fundraising campaign. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fred Pistello.
Thank you, Dean Newtfall. Thank you for joining us this evening. As you just heard, this celebration is 55 years old. Since 1967, the St. Louis Literary Award has more than endured. It has grown. It has thrived. Look around you in this room. We are at capacity, as are our digital feeds. This is really incredible. So on behalf of the university, I want to welcome everyone, whether you are here or watching virtually. The mission of St. Louis University is to pursue the truth for the greater glory of God and for the service of humanity. And we advance this mission every day in hundreds of ways. One way is through scientific exploration. Just a few weeks ago, SLU junior Kaya Harish was named one of only 10 recipients of the American Association for Cancer Research awardees. She is a junior in the college, and she is contributing to life-changing cancer research. We pursue our mission through the study of law and public policy. Today, we announced that another of our incredible students, Gabby Chido, is a recipient of a Truman Scholarship. That is one of only 62 awarded of over 700 applicants. Gabby's goal is to attend law school so that she can work in public service, advancing policies to address issues like domestic violence, education, and immigration. Congratulations. At SLU, our mission is being lived by young people who follow that mission like Kaya and Gabby, and 13,500 other students at SLU. We create a place where they can envision the world as it ought to be, as every Billiken should, and we support them. We support them with the best expertise and tools we can offer so that they can build that future of new possibilities. We are extremely proud of our students at SLU. Our mission depends on imagination. It depends on vision. It depends on empathy. It requires creativity and abundant hope. That is precisely what literature gives to us. Literature allows us to imagine new possibilities, to experience new perspectives, and to create new realities. Literature is at the heart of our Catholic Jesuit University's work. And so it is a great honor to gather with you this evening to celebrate one of the most compelling and inspired storytellers of our age, Neil Gaiman. Neil, thank you for the stories you share with us. Before I hand things off to Ted to continue the program, there are a few people I would like to thank. First, Ted Iber. Ted Iber, the executive director and driving force of the St. Louis Literary Awards programs. Year after year, Ted finds new ways to inspire readers and writers with engaging events and captivating conversations. He is ceaseless in his efforts to make this the premier literary award. Ted is successful. I want to thank you. Please join me in thanking Ted. Dr. Fran Postello, I know her. Thank you for your tireless efforts to support the Campus Read and all of the programming related to the St. Louis Literary Award. Dr. Toby Bennis. Toby, thank you for all that you have done to advance the study of literature and writing on the SLU campus. I'm deeply grateful for your years of leadership as chair of the Department of English. I've been in the academy for many years, and I have not found that English departments are the easiest to chair and to manage and to build and to make successful. They're rather complex organizations. So sincerely, thank you on behalf of the university, Toby, for everything you've done. And thank you again to our sponsors and to those who contributed financial support, coordinated events, moderated discussions, and organized the logistics of this evening's program. Things like this that just come together don't just do so. They don't just happen. It takes a lot of work. So thanks to all of you who contributed in large and small ways. And thank you all for joining us for this wonderful conversation. Enjoy the program.
I'm going to introduce St. Louis University English Chair Toby Bennis, and to take a minute to present the Walter J. Ong Jane Von Cannon Memorial Award for Excellence in Graduate Research. But Dr. Bennis, before you come up, I have a few words. Dr. Bennis is not only the longtime chair for the English department, but she's also been my friend since I first started working in this program back in 2014. Dr. Bennis has been chair of English since 2015, and this is her final year in that role. During that time, she's led the Department of Building Consensus and Using Common Sense. She's extremely approachable and very supportive of her colleagues and students. She never hesitates to speak her mind and always gives credit where credit is due. Over the years, Toby has been a tireless advocate for the department's graduate program and in general, and its graduate students in particular. She's supported curriculum and assessment changes at the graduate level and has also fostered a thriving research culture as reflected in the high quality of the Ong Award winners over the past several years. Toby has strong relationships with her graduate and undergraduates and has been particularly successful in motivating them to believe in themselves. Her relationship with them has been a huge part of their academic success. So I would now like you to welcome Dr. Toby Bennis.
I wasn't expecting all these lovely sentiments. I love my colleagues, by the way, all of them. So the St. Louis Literary Award celebrates great writers and the richness of literature. The Department of English is St. Louis University's custodian of our diverse and vibrant literary heritage. Each year, we announce the winner of our departmental prize for excellence in graduate student research in conjunction with the St. Louis Literary Awards ceremony. The English department has been the professional home to some of the best scholar teachers in the discipline. Perhaps the most illustrious of these was Walter Ong, a brilliant Jesuit scholar who taught for many years in our program. Accordingly, our department's award for graduate student excellence is named in honor of Father Ong, as well as for the Von Canel family, whose generosity underwrites this prize. And they are, of course, longtime supporters of the Literary Award. Tonight, I'm delighted to announce that the winner of this year's Walter J. Ong Von Canel Award is Matthew Holder. Matt is an exceptionally promising English doctoral candidate about to defend his dissertation. As an emerging scholar, Matt specializes in the way experimental literary forms, from comics to science fiction, explore complex social questions in recent American literature. In this way, Matt's work participates in a broader trend in literary study that acknowledges the aesthetic and cultural significance of so-called lowbrow forms of fiction, including horror and fantasy novels. So as any fan of The Sandman knows, these are both instruments of entertainment and social critique. Matt has already published 2 scholarly articles in respected journals, one of which studies how comics, as a literary form, represent extra-legal justice in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Matt's dissertation is entitled Wild Justice: Ecologies of Violence, Revenge, and Genre in Contemporary American Fiction. It's a pioneering study of how novels about environmental catastrophe present elements of the natural world as active forces rather than merely passive victims. In the words of Matt's faculty mentor, Dr. Rachel Greenwald Smith, quote, "While many readers of genre-bending novels are interested in how science fiction, fantasy, and horror displace human agency by insisting on inhuman forces in nature, Matt reads non-human forces as agents of revenge, violently punishing humanity for the damage done to the planet's ecosystems," end quote. Matt's study goes on to explore American fiction that applies this logic of revenge to the legacies of slavery and colonialism and their connections to environmental degradation. As this summary shows, Matt's scholarship is deeply engaged with questions of social justice at the heart of the Jesuit mission. He's also been recognized as an excellent teacher. He's received our Departmental Fournier Award, which is our highest honor for graduate student instructors. And he received a Summer Research Award to support the writing of his dissertation last summer. So please join me in congratulating the winner of the 2023 Walter J. Ong von Kahnel Award, Matthew Holder.
And these are for you. They were supposed to come out first. Hey, Matt. Thank you, Dr. Bennis. Congratulations to Matt Holder, who's a terrific teacher. And I know that because I just saw him in action recently in the classroom. All right, now I'd like to introduce a trio of musicians, including St. Louis University senior Serena Daniels on piano, performing Stardust Suite from the film Stardust. This suite is based on several of the songs from the film and was written specifically for tonight's performance by London-based composer Ilan Eshkeri, who also wrote the score for the entire film, Stardust. Ilan is a really brilliant musician and composer, and we're so grateful for all of his work with the trio. He was also a featured speaker this year for the Campus Read series this year. So, please welcome Serena Daniels on piano, Blake Herndon on violin, and Corey Kresmer on cello. You're in for a treat. That was so good. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's do this. Neil Gaiman is the New York Times best-selling and award-winning author and creator of books, graphic novels, short stories, film, and television for all ages, including Norse mythology, Neverwhere, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, The View, and The View from the Cheap Seats. His fiction has received Newbery, Carnegie, Hugo, Nebula, World Fantasy, and Will Eisner Awards. American Gods, based on the 2001 novel, is a critically acclaimed Emmy-nominated TV series, and he was the writer and showrunner for the miniseries adaptation of Good Omens, starring John Hamm, based on the book he co-authored with Sir Terry Pratchett. Gaiman was an executive producer and co-showrunner for Netflix's TV adaptation of his Sandman comic book series. Oh, it's so good. He's currently developing season 2 of Good Omens and a TV adaptation of Anansi Boys. In 2017, Neil Gaiman became a global goodwill ambassador for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. He's originally from England, and he now divides his time between Scotland, where Good Omens and Anansi Boys are filmed, and the United States, where he's a professor in the arts at Bard College. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. The selection of Neil Gaiman as the 55th writer to be honored by as the St. Louis Literary Award recipient since the program first launched in 1967 is significant for many reasons. I once again want to give full credit and thanks to the amazing members of the selection committee that are composed of SLU faculty and community members who represent other areas of the arts and several who are from other universities in town. The volume of material that we wade through is vast, sometimes anxiety-producing as the deadline advances, almost always fun. Arriving at a consensus feels momentous, and for someone in my position having the great honor to run this program for SLU, when a writer like Neil Gaiman accepts the author, it's really euphoric. Over the past 56 years, and for those of you doing the math, we did skip a year, our mission statement has undergone revisions, but it stands as it stands currently. This particular part I'm going to read is significant in helping guide the way. The St. Louis Literary Award recognizes a living writer with a substantial body of work that has enriched our literary heritage by deepening our insight into the human condition and by expanding the scope of our compassion. Does that apply to Neil Gaiman? 100%. So I spent most of my life, virtually my entire life actually, immersed in education, first as a student, then as an English teacher who's taught students at all levels. I'm a musician, I'm a writer. I'm passionate about providing unlimited opportunities in education and in the arts. Having taught thousands of students over a long career and working with so many artists of various mediums, I can't think of another writer who's had such a profound, positive, and meaningful impact on helping generations of all ages, but particularly young people, develop a love of literature, of learning, of being curious, of enhancing critical and creative thinking, of expanding vocabulary, of fostering empathy, of stimulating the desire to read and write, of appreciating and basking in the intellectual refuge of a great bookstore or library. I just don't think that there's another writer who has touched as many of us around the globe quite on the scope as Neil Gaiman. You know, there's a reason that kids love crazy hair. The day I swapped my dad for 2 goldfish and pirate stew. It's the same reason why older kids love the Graveyard Book. Young adults, Stardust and Neverwhere. And not that adults don't also love those books. But add into the mix The Sandman, Norse mythology, American Gods, and Good Omens, and the list goes on. The reason is because Neil Gaiman tells the emotional truth in his work, and he doesn't talk down to his readers, no matter the age. He respects his readers, will get the point, the joke, the moral, the reason why things happen as they do. So I know that everyone here, everyone watching online live or who will watch a recording of the show, is well aware that we're living in a politically contentious time. Teachers, librarians, school administrators, writers, and artists, the living and the dead ones, are under fire as members of the media, judiciary, and politicians try to control what's taught and read in schools. Across our country and in other parts of the world, books are being banned, professionally researched and vetted curriculum is being censored, and in some schools, the language educators use in the classroom is restricted and even criminalized. According to PEN America, more than 300 books, including graphic novels and comic books, have been banned in Missouri, and that number has actually grown since it was reported this fall. St. Louis Literary Award recipient number 50, Margaret Atwood, and number 55, Neil Gaiman, have books on that list, and both have signed petitions in the state to immediately reverse the bans and return all books to the library shelves. When it comes to writers, Neil Gaiman is a swashbuckler on the pirate ship, a chess master 3 steps ahead of everyone, the Formula One driver taking us on a ride and not leaving anyone behind. He didn't invent the genres that he writes in, but Neil takes them to another level and he explodes them. He takes realism and fantasy and horror and comedy and mythology and history and science and he throws it into a Cuisinart or maybe a Bassomatic. And what comes out is a wicked grounding of genres to blend the mix that reveals something else that feels both familiar and fresh. When Zadie Smith was looking over the list of 2023 Literary Award finalists last year, she said, if you go with Neil, he's not like anyone on this award list. He's a universe unto itself with a rabid fan base, So good luck with that. And he's a friend you can't miss. I consider him a friend now as well. So we're so happy to have him here tonight. So please put your hands together and welcome Neil Gaiman.
Thank you so much. I'm not exactly jaded, but at least used to getting standing ovations at the end of doing things. Getting one at the beginning, it's just like, where do we go from here? Thank you. I will take it as a standing ovation for having spent now most of my life making things up and writing them down. And I'm now 63, and I'm still absolutely convinced that I'm 62. I'm now 62, and I'm still convinced that there will be a knock on the door tomorrow, and somebody will explain to me that I have to stop what I'm doing and go away and get a real job. And I will go quietly because I've had this amazing lifetime where I got to dream on paper. I got to invent, I got to imagine, I got to tell the kind of stories that I loved. And they're letting me get away with it. And now you're giving me a glorious, it's not just a glorious thing, but it has a giant fountain pen nib on it. And speaking as a fountain pen obsessive, this is an incredibly fancy jacket, and it only has room for 3 fountain pens down there. It's not one of my proper jackets, which are just crawling with the buggers. I'm so incredibly honored. I am still quite convinced that I will sit down and Ted will say, so, it's not actually for you. And with that, I better find out if that is what you're going to say.
We haven't, okay, it's working. I was going to say we didn't even do a sound check. All right. So we are going to be in conversation. But before we do that, Matt, would you kill the lights, please? And we have a little surprise.
Hello, Neil. It's Nick. I apologize for my facial hair. I've just been cast in a new series as the Gorton's Fisherman, coming to a streaming service near you soon. I just wanted to send you some congratulations and a ton of love. As you know, I've been a huge fan of your writing since I discovered the Sandman graphic novels in the 90s, and I just love the way you always infuse your writing with magic and mischief and love and empathy and acceptance and diversity and good manners, and while cranking out ripping good yarns. So it's no surprise to me that you're the recipient of the 55th St. Louis Literary Award, and I just wanted to send my personal congratulations with a ton of love.
Hi, Neil. It's the Archangel fucking Gabriel. At least I think. I'm not sure. Welcome to St. Louis. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you and with you. I wish I could, but schedules as they are very malleable these days made it impossible. So I'm very sorry. But I do feel very comfortable that you will be in a welcoming environment at St. Louis University. And I'd like to extend the invitation to all of the St. Louisans there to please put your Cardinals hat on now and try to educate Mr. Gaiman on what just exactly a billiken is. Have the best time. Enjoy yourself in my fair city, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
There are things that I have done to John Hamm or had other people do, or that have happened to John Hamm in the second season of Good Omens, that while I am not at liberty to actually reveal what they are, I will say that I'm in many ways glad he's not sitting opposite me, getting his own back.
I wrote to him over the weekend and I said, I need you to save my ass. So would you please put a video up there? So he came through in the end. All right, so let's do this. First off, welcome back to the Midwest. You've lived in the Midwest and various other places for many years. In a 1999 interview, you described the Midwest as having a not in Hollywood, not in New York type of quality to it. I think everything about it is terrific, except the winters. So do you have any favorite parts in the Midwest that you enjoy? And then we'll get to the writing questions, I promise.
I got sort of peculiarly lucky in that I wound up moving to America completely, not exactly accidentally, but the year was 1991, and under the economic leadership of the George Bush before the last one, the dollar wasn't worth anything, which was kind of problematic for me because I was being paid exclusively in dollars, but I was living in England. And so we came up with a plan. The only way I could afford a place to live that would be big enough for 2 kids and all of the books was to come over to America for 2 or 3 years. That was the plan. And my wife, all of her family lived in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, so I knew that I wanted to be about an hour outside. I needed to be far enough away that they would call before they came over, because they knew that writers don't actually work, and they knew this because of how pathetically grateful I was whenever anybody showed up, and how I would immediately stop writing and show them around or whatever. So I got very lucky. I found a house in rural Wisconsin that looked like it was built by the people trying out for the Addams Family mansion, and then wound up living there for really the next 20 years. And I loved it, but I had no idea what to expect. And American Gods really just came out of this thing of me going, I've never been anywhere where the winters were trying to kill me before.
Well, I was going to ask, has the landscaping culture impacted your work? So
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And it was fun because up until that point, especially in Sandman, I'd written lots of America. And people would say, how can you write America? You're in England. And I'd say, well, yeah, but I can probably write, a Seattle that's as good as somebody in America who's never been to Seattle could write. But what was weird was nobody had really prepared me for the Midwest. And nobody prepares you lot for the Midwest either, because there are all of these things you take for granted because they're the environment that you've grown up in. And when you're this English person getting dropped into it, you're saying to people, this thing where they drive a car out onto the ice, and then they take bets on when it's gonna fall in. Is that weird to you? And people say, nope. And you go, I think it's weird. I think it's weird enough that I will put it in my book. And that really was sort of how the whole world of American Gods came about, because I just wanted to understand this place that I was now living. And it was baffling to me in fundamentally nice ways. And I loved the people. I loved talking to the people. I loved learning things. I loved the strangeness. You know, some of my favorite places have been Midwestern places, and some of them aren't there anymore. McCosh's House of Books on the outskirts of Minneapolis-St. Paul has not been there since Mr. McCosh died 20 years ago. But it was my favorite bookshop on the planet, because it wasn't really a bookshop. It was an abandoned hospital that he had taken over, bought cheaply because nobody wanted this hospital, filled everything, including the shower stalls, with bookshelves. And he sold books to booksellers, but twice a year he would send out these photocopied flyers to his mailing list, and somehow I'd made it onto his mailing list that just gave the address and said, you need these books more than I do. And you could turn up and just prowl the place and buy treasures.
We have a treasure with Left Bank Books, by the way, here, and they are selling your books out front. So I just did want to make a plug for Left Bank.
They are. And I signed them all at lunch.
He did. He did. And I've got the photos to show. Over 2,000 books, so yeah, it's pretty impressive. I was just thinking the Ice Fisherman could make a nice comic at some point, if you ever deem. All right, so you said as a child, you read authors including the Inklings from Oxford, like C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, reams of fabulous and mythologists, comic book writers like Jack Kirby, fantasy writer Roger Zelazny, all of them in some way inspiring you as a writer. So I know we could list many more, but what would you say to writers who are just getting into it, who are inspired to write by reading your books? You had a kind of a similar question to that today.
Well, as you know, when you start out writing, it seems unimaginable that it would happen, and then one day you start running into writers who tell you that something you did inspired them, and that's kind of cool and nice, but they're grown-up writers and you're a grown-up writer. And then you get the scary thing, which is the people who explain that they ran across this thing that you wrote when they were very little. And that's why, you know, and it's the ones who I worry about most are always the ones who approach me and say, you wrote Coraline. And I know it's going to go to one or two places. And in one of those places, it was an inspiration for them. It was marvelous. It was the book that kept them going through the dark times, and it inspired them to become a writer. Or I get told about the months they spent sleeping with the light on.
I've heard that as well, yeah. So you're writing, you were involved in so many things. Are there books and authors now that you turn to for inspiration?
Yes, although they're an odd and mixed lot, because there are writers I turn to inspiration because I marvel at how they turn sentences, and I love what they did. I can pick up John Crowley's Little Big and just lose myself, open it to anywhere and read for a while and put it down happy and feeling inspired. And then there are authors who nobody likes but me. And what I love about them is it reminds me how gloriously ridiculous the business is of making things up and writing them down. There's an author that probably nobody here has ever heard of called Harry Stephen Keeler. You can make a noise if you've even heard of Harry Stephen Keeler. There we go, dead silence. So, Harry Stephen Keeler was either the greatest bad writer in the history of America, or the worst great writer. And I'm not sure which. There is no crime that you can accuse an author of that he is not guilty of 12 times a page. His plots are nonsensical. His characters are gross caricatures. His attempt to render accents phonetically should have been rendered illegal. He had obsessions which play out in the way that he would write books, because he had to deliver, if memory serves, 60,000-word novels to his publisher, but he tended to write 75,000-word novels, so he would randomly cut out 15,000 words, and he would use that as the beginning of his next novel. At least 6 of his books begin with people swapping bags with other bags that are identical, but one of them happens to have a skull in it. And I love him. I love him so much. I can pick up a Harry Stephen Keeler novel when I am miserable. I can pick up a Harry Stephen Keeler novel when I go, what am I doing as a writer? Am I any good? And I can read Harry Stephen Keeler, and it's just like, you got away with this. I can do this. I would recommend particularly, I think, The Mystery of the Traveling Skull was brought back into print about 20 years ago, so that is sometimes findable.
Love it. So if you need to rewatch this will be up next week on the YouTube page, so you can check it out. All right, so same kind of question regarding music, because I know you're an audiophile as well. So, by the way, Neil has a brand new song and video out with Neil Gaiman and the 4-play string quartet called Bloody Sunrise, which is quite good, and I just saw the video about 2 weeks ago. All right, so this is normally a question I reserve for the end of an interview. But are there musicians and bands that have inspired you as well?
Oh, so many musicians. And magicians. I was always, when people would send me those lists of, can you list the people who've inspired you? Lou Reed would always be very high on the list, just because I loved what he would do with his best songs, where they felt like 3-minute novels. They had people in, and they had reasons, and I would get lost in them. Elvis Costello. I love what he does with words. Amazing. Stephen Sondheim. I ripped off Sondheim continuously. Sometimes just the way that he would put words together. And when you're writing, particularly writing comics, I think, where some of the techniques you use to write comics are poetry techniques and songwriting techniques because of the compression, because of the economies, because you have 30 words that you can fit comfortably into a word balloon before it looks crowded. You can get about 180 words on a page, but you're always dealing with, I would write a line of dialogue, or I would write a caption, and then I would need to figure out, what can I lose from this? Right. And you do it as if you were writing a song. So you're trying to get everything to matter. and Sondheim was definitely one of the people I would just look at for inspiration on that.
And I think of Costello and Lou Reed and Stephen Sondheim. They're all storytellers in their music as well, which is something else that sets them apart as lyricists. And they also write amazing melodies.
They do. I fortunately didn't have to do that, and I had artists who could draw the pictures as well. So.
Okay, as I mentioned in my introduction, the Graveyard Book was one of our campus read books, which is open to everybody, not just on campus, but to the general community as well. So you said that you had an idea for the Graveyard Book at the age of 25, and you tried to write it, and you realized it wasn't going in the direction that you wanted it to. So I'm curious if you could explain a little bit about that, and how did you find it?
Well, what was great is it wasn't. I remember I had the Graveyard Book. I was 25 or 26. I had a 2-year-old son, 18-month, 2-year-old, somewhere like that, who loved tricycling. And we had, at that point, we were living in a very tall, thin, spindly house above a shop. And every room was on a different floor. And the problem with having a small boy and a tricycle was it would have meant death to allow him to tricycle in the house. So every day I would walk him over the road to the little graveyard on the other side of the road, and he would ride his little tricycle around. And I just remember looking at him one day and going, he looks really comfortable here. I should do a story about a kid who gets brought up in a graveyard by dead people. It'd be like the Jungle Book, only instead of animals, I'd have dead people. And it seemed a brilliant idea, and I went straight up to my office, and I sat down, and I basically wrote about half of a first chapter. And I looked at what I wrote, and I went, okay, this is the idea that I've got is a better idea than I am a writer. I'm not good enough for this, and I need to get better in order to write it. And it wasn't, there was no question in my mind. I'd written and published a handful of short stories at that point. I'd written and published a lot of journalism. And I knew that I had a way to go as a writer. And I knew that the idea was better than I was. And so every 5 or 6 years, I'd try writing the first chapter again, and I'd stop fairly quickly and go, no, this is better than I am. And then round about 2004, I went, I don't think I'm getting any better anymore. So it doesn't really matter now if I'm not good enough. I'm about as good as I'm going to be. So I may as well write it. And even then, I started it, except I had a brilliant idea. I thought, I think I'm going to start in the middle, because I've started at a version of chapter 1 so many times now. I'll start a story in the middle and find out what these characters are like when they're all sort of capable of walking around. And I was on a vacation with my 2 daughters, and I don't do vacations. This was the first vacation that I had taken in years and years and years. And so I'm sitting on a beach going, I don't really know what you do on beaches, so I pulled out my notebook and I wrote the first 2 pages of this chapter, The Witch's Headstone. And my daughter Maddie came past doing sensible things like swimming, and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm writing a story. She said, read it to me. So I read it to her. And I just got to the point of convincing myself I needed to give up. And she said, "Oh my God, this is great. What happens next?" So then I had to keep writing so that she found out.
So did you know what the story was going to be? Or were you just, and this actually leads to just a bigger question about your process when developing a story, but did you know what it was going to be?
I knew that, yeah, I did, because it was all contained in that very, very first idea. Mm-hmm. Because the very first idea had been, it's called The Graveyard Book. It's going to be like The Jungle Book. And that Like The Jungle Book gave me the idea that this was going to be a conversation with Kipling, that I was going to look at The Jungle Book, and that I was going to be free to reimagine, to converse, to use The Jungle Book as a wall that I could bounce a ball off, kind of thing. So I knew the shape of it. I knew it had to end with him leaving the graveyard, for example. And I got to play with ideas. So I would take the bandalog of Kipling, these wild monkeys, and turn them into my ghouls. I would take a story called The King's Ankus and turn it upside down and create the witch's headstone. And in each case, there isn't a one-to-one correspondence, nor is there meant to be. But there are things where I could go, I'm going to take this. Silas came out of Bagheera, in some ways, and Miss Lupescu comes out of Baloo. The Sleer bears some relationship to Car. It's, and when I say that, it's also not the Disney story. It is very much the Kipling thing. And but that idea that I was going to be in conversation with Kipling also created this very peculiar structure where I knew from the word go that I was going to create a novel out of short stories. But they had to be short stories because Kipling wrote 2 volumes of The Jungle Book, only half of Mowgli stories, and the other half of which are great stories with animals in, but they're not that thing. So I went, okay, I need this to be short stories in order for the idea of bouncing off against The Jungle Book to work. So what I'm going to do is I will do a story every 2 years of Bod's life. So I will start when he's 18 months old, and then we're just going to meet him every couple of years and see what's happening to him. And I will see if I can build an arc, a sort of a big arch arc, not a building that's meant to rescue animals from the rain.
But it sounds like once you got going, whether you start, it sounds like you start back in the middle, but once you got going, I assume it moved fairly quickly.
It was.
So I wanted to know, when you are ready to work on something, do you outline it first? Do you tend to just start from an idea and then take it from there?
I'm not a very good outliner, and I find that it takes the fun away for me. I'm much more likely to start something, get fairly deep into it with just a sort of a bunch of ideas and notes to myself that I never then go and look at, get 3/4 of the way through it, get completely stuck, and then write an outline that takes me to the end. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before.
I do not recommend this to anybody. I do not think this is a wise or sensible way to write. You will not find me, in a masterclass saying, now what you need to do is do this like I do. But I have now done it enough times that it seems to be part of my method. And it's a really nice kind of way of outlining, is you're 3/4 of the way through, and now you're sort of listing all the things that you know need to happen in order to get you to the end of the story. And it tends to make it less amorphous and much more real for me.
Do you know do you know how big the story is going to be when you're starting? So are you thinking...
I do, but
yeah,
I'm
okay.
always wrong.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's okay.
I always know exactly how long the thing is going to be when I start, and whether, I remember with Sandman explaining to everybody that I thought it was going to go 30 issues. And then I told people it would definitely go to 50 issues and we'd be done by issue 50. And then I started saying, well, if we ever get to issue 75, I'll be very surprised. And that was where we got to. The Ocean at the End of the Lane was meant to be a short story. I remember I was writing this short story and it didn't finish. So I kept going, and somewhere in there I sent a note to my editor saying, I'm really sorry, this seems to be a novella. And I know that you can't really publish novellas because they're really awkward. And then I finished it, and I typed it up, and I did a word count, and I sent this delighted email to everybody saying, I have accidentally written a novel. So.
Okay, so along those same lines, do you know that, okay, this book is going to be more intended for adults, this is going to be more of a children's book? And that's going to lead me to a Stardust question.
I would say yes, but not with Ocean at the End of the Lane, where I wound up writing notes to myself in the margin. As I was writing the book in handwriting, there would be, who is this book for, question mark, question mark. Is this a children's story? I actually had to stop and try and define for myself what makes a children's story, what makes an adult novel. And I decided in the end that Ocean at the End of the Lane wasn't a children's story because I felt that one thing that children's stories have to give, are obligated to give, is hope. And that Ocean at the End of the Lane did not give hope in the way that I felt like a children's story should. And then going, okay, so this isn't a children's story, allowed me to sort of not, let it be what it was going to be. But I really didn't know. And there's a case to be argued that Ocean at the End of the Lane is kind of a children's book hidden inside an adult novel. So it's sort of there for you if you persist and are a kid and get through the first sort of chapter and a half. There's a fabulous children's book waiting for you, but you're going to have to keep going.
I'm curious. So Ocean at the End of the Lane is now a touring play. I know it's touring in Europe. One of our members in the audience, maybe more, I just saw it in Ireland. Have you seen it? Yes.
I have. I've seen it now 3 times.
What do you think?
It was really interesting because the National Theatre approached me. I would go every 6 or 7 months to a read-through of what the script was at that point and what they got to at that point, and I would give them notes, and I would think, I wonder if this is going to work. And I really wasn't sure. And then it was 2 weeks before it was going to go on at the National Theatre, and I went to the very first run-through that they did of the entire play. And they weren't entirely in costume for it. It was very much just a thing to see if the whole thing could be run through. They didn't have all of the props or anything. And it wasn't on a stage. It was in just a rehearsal space in the National Theatre in a back room. And I'm sitting there next to the director, and the director and I are the only audience. watching this, and it's about 15 minutes before the end, and I realize there are tears running down my face, and I'm trying to decide how, what should I do? Because there are all these actors out there, and there aren't any lights. We're all in the same space, and I'm crying, and eventually I settle for sort of flicking them away. And I thought, okay, well, that was a thing that happened. Okay, and this works. And I went back and, let my family and friends know that I thought it was going to be really good and they should come to the first night. And then I'm at the first night, and I look to my right, and there is my wife Amanda, and she is crying. And I'm like, okay, well, she cries at things. That's okay. And then I look to my left, and there is a Daily Telegraph journalist writing in a notebook, and I see tears sploshing on the notebook. And I'm going, now that does not happen. And that phenomenon has happened every time I've seen it, and it happens with people around me, and it's not because it's sad. It's because it makes you feel big, huge things, and they wind up sort of coming out through your eyes. It's a very remarkable piece of theatrical work.
Will it be touring the U.S.?
The honest answer is I don't know. I hope so. Right now it's touring the UK. This is really the first time I think they've taken a national theatre production, and rather than just sort of plonk it down in London for people to come to, they decided that as being the UK National Theatre, actually, they were going to get out and take it all around the UK and Ireland, which they're still in the middle of doing. This week, they're in Wimbledon. And then, I know there's a lot of conversation going on about what they're going to do next, and whether they're going to come back to the UK or whether they're just going to keep going around the world. And I really hope they go around the world. It's the kind of play, it does things that mean that you really do have to be there in the audience. It's not the kind of thing where you can just put a bunch of cameras up and show people and have them feel like they've been there. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I have to tell you, full disclosure to our audience as well, we were going to do a short piece from the play. Our theater students were going to do it, but we ran into copyright issues. So yeah, we couldn't do it, but we were going to.
That would have been cool. What I'm hoping is that sooner or later, I love the idea that in 10 years, 15 years' time, high schools will start putting on The Ocean at the End of the Lane and making parents who think they know what they're in for see something very different.
Okay. Nancy Bell, Lucy Cashin, I hope you heard that, two of our amazing theater professors. All right, I'm going to get to an audience question in just a second, but I wanted to ask a Stardust question because it related earlier. People have asked you what genre you prefer to write in, to which you've typically responded. You just like to tell stories, regardless of the category they fall into. So Stardust was our other campus read novel this year, and it reads, at least to me it reads, like a Victorian fairy tale, often laugh out loud funny. So this is a two-part question. Did you set out to write an adult fairy tale right out of the gate with Stardust?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Stardust was, I didn't just set out to write a fairy tale. I set out to write a fairy tale that felt like it had been written no later than the 1920s. So that was where the fountain pen thing came from. I had not used a fountain pen since I was at school, and I hadn't handwritten anything really in my entire writing career since my very first book, which I wrote while I was still teaching myself to type. But I thought, okay, if it's going to feel like a fairy tale, and it's going to feel like it was written in the 20s, or definitely no later than that, I'm going to go and get a fountain pen, and I'm going to buy a big leather notebook, and I'm going to handwrite this because I think it will change the way that I write. And some of that came from editing. I'd edited a couple of short story anthologies. I'd done one in the late 80s, and I'd done one in the mid-90s. And I noticed that the stories that I was editing that people were submitting in the late 80s, most of which were still being written on typewriters, tended to be about 3,000 words long and tended to just sort of be very on point. And the ones that I would get in the mid-90s, all of which were written on computers, tended to be 6,000 to 8,000 words long and tended to be a bit woofly, as if they were like a gas. They'd expanded to fill a larger space. And I thought, I think I'm probably guilty of that too. I will head in on a computer and type something that's like what I'm doing, and then I'll work it over, and if I can see two ways of doing something, I'll probably do both of them because it's easier than deleting one. And I thought, if I just try and do this in pen, let me see what happens. And I found that I started forming sentences differently. I'd have to have more of an idea where the sentence was going before I started. Otherwise, it would be a mess of crossings out, and you don't like that. So, and I really did feel that it was an easier way to get the texture of a fairy tale, but also the texture of something that was written 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about children's stories needing hope at the end of them. When you write something, do you kind of project how you want an audience to think about a lesson to come from the story? Or when you finish it, do you think they will interpret it the way they interpret it? It is now out there in the world.
Neither. I want to tell, the important thing for me is telling the story. And in my first draft, that's all I want to do, is just make sure the story gets told. In a second draft, I'll probably look at it and go, okay, what am I doing here? What are the themes? Is there anything I can do to buttress the themes? Is there anything that I've done that actually pulls away or diminishes from the whole thing? Okay, I can lose that, and that kind of thing. But I may have a big idea, but I never want to get into the sort of the baby bird school of moralizing, where you chew an idea up and pre-digest it and then eject it into the gaping mouths of the people reading. So they will know that something bad is bad or whatever. I want people to think, I want them to read. I may have ideas of my own, but I would like it if somebody would read Neverwhere and maybe the next time they walk past a homeless person, they won't pretend they're invisible. Mm-hmm. That would be a good thing, and I'd like them to think, and I'd like them to experience. Mm-hmm. But it's not like I'm writing my book going, this is how I need you to think about these issues.
I think it's time to go to the big stack. I really wish I had those, like a big lottery vat to just throw these cards in.
For the record, all of the questions were really good, which I can never work out why it is. Some places give you fabulous questions, and every one of them is great, and other places don't. But you guys, they're all great.
We have rocked it here. This one has a really cool drawing in it, too. So thank you to Kevin H and Nathaniel H. All right, so here's the question. How did becoming a parent impact your writing?
How to becoming a parent? Well, I was a parent incredibly young. So I do not have a control version of me who never was a parent to actually compare against. But I will say that the best thing about being a parent for me was stealing ideas from my kids. And, you know, a lot of the thing where people say, well, what was your inspiration for this? Coraline began when my daughter Holly was 4, and she would come home from nursery school, she would sit on my lap, she would dictate stories about little girls, normally called Holly, who would come home and there would be their mother in the kitchen, only it wasn't their mother, it was a witch. And then Holly would get imprisoned under the house, in the prison under the house with all of the dead babies. And then all of the dead babies and Holly would escape and they would go to America to find their real mother. And I loved it, you know, these were great. And
Did Howie's mom
I remember
feel the same way?
thinking, you know, I will, these are the kind of stories you love. And I went down to my local bookshop and I said, what have you got in the way of really good horror stories for like 4 or 5-year-olds? And they didn't have anything. And they gave me a meaningful look. So I knew that I was going to have to write it. And, you know, and that really is, you know, Mike gave me the Graveyard Book, Holly gave me Coraline, Maddie gave me The Wolves in the Walls. Ash has sort of, the trouble with Ash, who is currently 7, is he's the one I don't steal from because his story ideas are better than mine. and they're just sort of terrifying. But he loves doing his own comics and stuff, but I'm sure sooner or later he will say something and I will go, I'm nicking that. And I will.
Love it. All right, back to the pile. All right. Okay, what is the strangest or most memorable research? Oh shoot, I've hit a word I can't read. I don't think my glasses are going to do it here. You want to read it?
What is the strangest or most memorable research rabbit hole you've gone down while writing a book? You know, it's weird. The research rabbit holes that I went down writing books, none of them ever seem weird at the time. Because it's part of your book. And all of a sudden, you are, you know, I mean, for American Gods was probably the weirdest because that was one where the research rabbit hole involved grabbing a copy, or a, you know, dog-eared copy of Roadside Attractions and driving across America, going to the strangest ones. And sometimes just sort of going, I don't believe I'm here and I don't believe what I'm looking at. That would have been the giant trailer with the Perspex side in which it's parked on a sort of a lay-by, you know, just off a main road somewhere in Wisconsin. And in it, there is what a small notice claims to be a life-size reproduction of the largest block of cheese in the world as presented at the 1967 World's Fair, or whichever giant exhibit it was. And it's just a tractor trailer filled with a polystyrene painted yellow lump of not cheese. And I just remember standing in front of it going, God's. It's got to be God's.
We've got some great ones here in the state, by the way. And by whoever wrote that question, I apologize. That was not hard to read at all. As soon as you said it, I'm like, of course it's rabbit. As an English teacher, I know better in my handwriting. No excuses. All right, let's do one more, and then I'm going to get back to what I've got in front of me. I'm really just trying to avoid putting on the reading glasses. Okay, if you were stranded on a desert island, it could bring one fountain pen and one unlimited supply. What would you bring? What ink? Oh, I'm sorry. One ink that's unlimited. What would
Unlimited
you bring?
supply of ink.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hate to say this, but whoever wrote that question has omitted the most important part of that, which is what am I writing on? Because it will change. What I would like to have to write on is a book that I bought at McCosh's House of Books, as if organized. I like that. I bought it looks like an encyclopedia, a big old encyclopedia, but it's actually an accounts book from the 1840s. Every page is numbered, it's completely blank, and every page lies perfectly flat. I mean, this book is a feat of engineering. And I bought it and fantasized that I would get maybe a Victorian pen, but probably a Waterman flexi nib pen from about 1920, when they used to make the pens that would do glorious copperplate. And I would get an ink that would be sort of umber, one of those deep, rich browns, and then I would write a 500-page Victorian novel in this book. And I think if I was on a desert island, I would finally have no other option, as long as I had that book, than to do it. And I used to love those, if ever you get a chance, if anyone out here is a pen fetishist of any kind, I strongly recommend beautiful flexi-nib pens from before the invention of carbon paper. As soon as people invented carbon paper and they needed pens that would go through and press things, they sort of abandoned these nibs where the tines of the nib sort of come apart and come back together again and make glorious lines of different weight.
Watching you signing books today with a fountain pen at a blazing pace was remarkable. So we have video of it. Okay, so throughout your career, you've raised funds and awareness for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, an organization that seeks to help individuals and businesses who are being criminally persecuted because of the comic books they read, make, buy, or sell in support of First Amendment rights. What, in your opinion, is the role of artists in raising awareness for social justice and societal issues?
I think those are two incredibly different questions, because one part of it is, let's talk about the First Amendment, and the other part of it is, what is the role of the artist in improving the world that they're in, making it a better place? And I think the role of the artist is, it is the job of an artist to leave the world more interesting than they found it, and perhaps to make it better, perhaps to change the way that people think about things. You improve it if you can, but I think that's what all of us should be doing, whether we're artists or not. In terms of the First Amendment and in terms of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, it's one of those things where I was fascinated by the fact that you could have words, and words were fairly safe. You know, words in books back then were fairly safe, and pictures were fairly safe. They could hang in art galleries, and the moment that you put them together, you got police raids. And suddenly you're bailing people who own comic shops out of jail, and you're paying for expert witnesses and lawyers to try and get somebody who's drawn a zine with scary stuff in it from obscenity prosecutions. And it just seemed to me like that was obscene. It was, you know, occasionally it was my stuff they would go after, but not often. I remember being amused and horrified when I learned that the chief of police in Jacksonville, Florida, had turned up in a comic shop to tell them that unless they took my Death, the High Cost of Living, which had an 8-page thing on safe sex and how to avoid sexual diseases, during the course of which a condom is put on a banana, that is as rude as it got, she would be closing them down. And so the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund lawyer, they contacted the Legal Defense Fund, the lawyer wrote to the Jacksonville Police Department explaining the concept of the First Amendment, and they did not turn up again. Having said that, that was, 20 years ago, and these days, I suspect they'd be back with a bulldozer. I mean, we are in a world right now in which, on the one hand, there has never been more access to books, to graphic novels, to the written word, to ideas, and on the other hand, libraries and librarians and teachers and the people who get you the books and the comics have never been under more attack. And it's a very strange place to be right now. And for that, I will carry on supporting libraries, I will carry on fundraising, and I will carry on doing what I can to raise awareness. This morning I read an article about a region in Texas where they took 10 books off the library shelves and were ordered by a judge for First Amendment reasons to put them back, and so are planning to close down the library to avoid having to put these 10 books back. And when you learn that one of these books was about how the KKK is not a good thing, and that's what they're challenging and getting upset about. I think the book was called something like The KKK, the Making of a Terrorist Organization. And there are people who are upset enough about the characterization of the Ku Klux Klan as a terrorist organization that they are going to close down the libraries in that area so that nobody gets to encounter dangerous ideas like that.
One could take a leap that the books aren't being read.
Yes.
Your work in Anansi Boys is being adapted into a series for Amazon. In 2021, you wrote that you identified the director, I'm not sure if I'm going to get her name right, Hanil Culpepper? Not sure if I've got her name right. But after viewing the episode of Star Trek Picard that she directed and talking to Michael Chabon about her work, many of you know that Chabon was the 2020 St. Louis Literary Award winner and author of the Pulitzer Prize winning The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, one of our campus read books. Oh, yeah. And he said good luck, by the way. Okay. He was excited for you. That book is also, and Michael Chabon is also invested in the world of comics. Have the two of you ever considered working or collaborating on a project?
No. We never have. I think partly because we like being friends. And, you know, Michael and I sort of got adopted into their family. And then we did a 23andMe thing, and we discovered that we are cousins, distant cousins.
That's so cool. Wow.
Which, honestly, I think when you get down to it, practically, given the tiny gene pool, all Ashkenazi Jews
Right.
are functionally cousins.
Okay, I'm
But
going to check.
you know, they kind of adopted me.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm part of the family now. So, and also I love reading whatever Michael writes. So I don't really want to spoil it with getting my stuff all over it.
Okay. So speaking of projects, how are things looking for the Graveyard Book film?
So the Graveyard Book film is currently at Disney. They got it about 11 years ago because Henry Selick, who made Coraline, was briefly at Pixar. And the idea was that they were going to do the Graveyard Book with Henry directing it as a Pixar film. And then a new head of Disney came in, and the first thing he did was sack Henry and can the film that Henry was making at the time, which I think was really tragic. And so they've been working on the Graveyard Book for about a decade, over in live action, and every year they write a script, and every year they call me up and tell me that they've just fired the writer and they're hiring somebody else to write another script. And I think we're at least 10 scripts in at this point. But I'm hearing that they've got a director now and another writer, and I'm just honestly waiting to see what's going to happen.
But no thought of serializing it.
It's one of those things where I have definitely had the conversation with Disney to go, why don't you make this into television? These days it would be perfect for that. You wouldn't be having to deal with the what do we throw out question. You could put everything in. And by the same token, every now and again people come up to me and go, we are very famous. We'd like to do the Graveyard Book as a play or a musical. And I will say to Disney, you know, you could sort of try it out on the stage. Look, here is cool, famous people who make fabulous theater. They would like to do that. And Disney goes, nope, we're going to make a movie. And I don't know if ever they will. I don't even know, honestly, if they can. I'm trying to think of the last time Disney made a movie that was an original, good live-action movie that wasn't a remake of something that they'd done as a cartoon. And you know, I want them to make a good movie, and I hope that they do. But it's one of those things where pretty much everything else in my life that is getting made, I'm now part of. You know, I'm part of Sandman for about 30 years. People were trying to make Sandman movies that I had nothing to do with, and they kept me at a distance, and I would occasionally read scripts and go, oi, and there were some bad scripts. There was one script that was bad enough that I sent it to Ain't It Cool News in a brown paper envelope, and they wrote an article about how bad it was, and it killed that film, which was it was. I got up to page 19 of that script. It was so. Anyway, but so when we went out with Sandman as television, the thing that we were able to say is, this is the first Sandman that Neil will be part of. And I'm You know, so the Graveyard Book is the only one of the things right now that is not true, because it's like a sort of legacy project.
Do you like having that kind of involvement in the production of a film? I mean, I read, I don't know if this is true, that you sat through over 1,000 auditions for the character of Morpheus in Sandman. Is that true?
There were probably about, by the time they'd finished, I had to watch about 1,000, and which means that the casting directors probably had to watch about 5,000. And just for the record, Tom Sturridge was in the first email of links to things, and we all went, "Oh, he's really good." And then we saw another 300 or 400 and said, "We think it's Tom." And Netflix were mostly convinced, but then COVID happened, and they went, "Well, seeing that we're not going to start shooting in May anyway, and we've got a while, let's just look at every other actor with good cheekbones on the face of the planet." And then it was like, okay, we watched them all, it's still Tom.
So great. All right, let's go back to the stack. All right, trying to do a blind pick here. Oh. Okay, sorry. I gotta break it out.
It's reading glasses time, isn't it? Or you can toss it over here.
Well, then my role is diminished. Okay.
That is true. We
all right.
would not want to diminish
Yeah, no, I
your-
got it now. All right. Which of your works do you most hope will stand the test of time, and what about it do you want to be part of your legacy?
What a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. Thank you, Remy.
I don't care. And I say that partly because I won't be around, and partly because I know that life and critical judgment and what lasts is weird. A.A. Milne was the deputy editor of Punch in the 1930s, was incredibly famous in the UK for his collections of humorous writing. Many best-selling books with titles like The Holiday Round, of just these wonderful, funny articles that he'd written in Punch. But he was also an incredibly successful playwright. And at one point he had, I think, 5, possibly 6 different plays, all running in London's West End. And if you do an Amazon search right now for A.A. Milne, you will find maybe 1,000 different editions of the Winnie the Pooh books and his 2 books of poetry for kids, Now We Are Sick and When We Were Very Young. And that's it. That's what he's remembered by. I don't think he had any idea that that was going to be what he would be remembered by. I don't even think it's fair. We've forgotten the funny writing, we've forgotten the plays. Toad of Toad Hall has kind of survived a little bit, his adaptation of The Wind in the Willows. That's about it. And I love the idea that something will survive me. So please do not take my I do not care as a ha-ha, I do not care. No, I care enormously, but I would be just fine if, 200 years from now, somebody turns to somebody else and says, do you know, the guy who wrote that book about the little panda who sneezes did other stuff too. I'd be okay with that.
All right, back to the stack. What's an example of an inspiration that led to the writing or completion of a book?
Well, I've given you The Graveyard Book and I've given you Coraline. Stardust was the most perfectly literal moment of inspiration I've ever had. And since you're studying or reading Stardust, I was at the World Fantasy Convention in Tucson, Arizona in 1991. I was at a party at Terry Windling's house in Tucson, Arizona, and I was talking to Jane Yolen. And it's one of those nice, I like the fact that I can give you corroborative detail on this one. And it was out on the edge of the desert, and I watched a meteorite come down. And it was just one of those perfect moments. The sky was black velvet. The meteorite was like a falling diamond, and it came down, and it seemed to come down really close to a point where I could go, okay, that was where it came down. And I thought, I could just walk and go and find that. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if, when I got there, it was a sort of a science fiction-y meteorite, and it was a proper big glowy one. And then I thought, yeah, but I've seen that a million times. It'd be much more interesting if it was a person. If it was a woman with a broken leg. And if the person looking for her had promised to bring back a fallen star. And it was like the entire opening to Stardust just sort of played out in my head. And I left the party, and I went back to the convention, and I found Charles Vess, the artist. And Charles was at a party because we had both won the World Fantasy Award that day. We'd won it for a comic book. We'd won it for the Midsummer Night's Dream episode of Sandman, the issue of Sandman 19. And this was the Saturday night. The Sunday morning, they would amend the rules to prevent that from ever happening again. But we had our award. And I went and found Charlie and just said, this is the story. Do you want to draw it? And he said yes.
Great story. I realize that I haven't asked any questions about working with illustrators, and you've worked with amazing illustrators. I don't know if you know that we had one of our book talk speakers was Craig Russell earlier this year. And I asked him, I said, you and Neil have collaborated so often, books like Coraline and the Graveyard Book and Norse mythology and many others. And I said, do you have a relationship with him where you kind of know how each other thinks and you're very collaborative? And he said, no, not really. He said, I do my thing, Neil does his thing, and Neil weighs in on what I'm doing. And
But I like that because he surprises me every time. I like, there's nothing predictable about Craig, and I've never written. The only thing that I will say with Craig is I have never written full script for Craig. Normally, if I'm writing for an artist, I will start page 1, panel 1, this is what we're looking at, these are how the panels work, and all that. With Craig Russell, he tells stories better than I do. He tells stories better than pretty much anybody on this planet. Why would I do that? So basically, I just tell him what's happening, and I give him the words, and I watch him make magic.
I know I'm promoting my own program here, but it is worth checking out that interview with Craig Russell because he is a fabulous storyteller and could do voiceover. I think he's such a good public speaker.
Oh, he's amazing. I love, it is that weird, it probably feels this way for Craig too, because he's not that much older than I am. However, I was 15 when I read my first Craig Russell comic, so as far as I was concerned, he was this towering, ancient figure, Craig Russell. and meeting him and going, I've been reading you since I was a kid, and he was not as thrilled to hear that.
I think he's less than 10 years older than you. Okay, a question from the stack. What is your recommendation for upcoming writers in a world with GPT?
I think that ChatGPT is fundamentally irrelevant to the business of writing. There are absolutely places where I can imagine that, AI may replace people writing, but I think it's going to be on things with such, it's like those kids' cartoons where every episode is exactly the same. You could absolutely just program it to run a variant on the same script, and which is basically what the people who are writing it have to do anyway. They just write something very similar. And I can imagine that happening, but I can't imagine it happening there is no creativity. Having said that, I tried playing once with ChatGPT when I was asked to write a thing and I thought, I have no ideas. So I typed in a thing and watched ChatGPT give me a sentence or two of how it would do it. And I went, oh my God, that is such crap. And thought it wouldn't be like that at all, and sat down and wrote one. So it was inspirational. Absolutely
Right, there you go. Yep.
Fabulous inspiration on going, are you out of your mind, ChatGPT?
I felt the same way about drum machines when they came into existence. As a drummer, I was afraid my position was going to be taken over, but we live in co-harmony.
And the thing is, they aren't. I think at the end of the day, it's something that people will use. When I was a very young writer, I had a program called Babel, which was a sort of like a mixing desk for text. And I used to love playing with Babel. I would throw a short story into it and see how it was going to recombine the words, and it would create weird things that no human being actually could have done. And then I'd cut them out and put them into stories when I needed them.
I want to point out, if you've been watching me go through the cards, I'm not putting cards away because they're not good questions. It's because we've already answered the questions. This is a good, we actually are going to have to wrap it up in a moment, but I do think this is a really good one, just given who sponsors this award, St. Louis University Libraries. And the question is this, and not written by one of our faculty: why are libraries essential? That's the question.
Okay. There are a whole bunch of reasons. Let's start with the fact that the library is pretty much the only public space you get to go into that does not expect you to pay money. It is a safe space. It is a space that contains access to information. It's also a space that contains librarians. It's not merely, a library is not merely a place with these books. Librarians are there, and librarians help. And they help in ways that you would imagine, pointing you at books, pointing you at magazines, pointing you at references, explaining interlibrary loans for you, things like that. But they also help in ways that you might not imagine. We're in a world right now in which if you want to apply for a job, you are going to need access to the internet. You're going to need access to the internet probably to find that the job is being advertised. You're going to need access to the internet in order to apply for it. not every human being has access to the internet. Not every human being knows how to access the internet, yet a lot of these people may want jobs. Librarians often find themselves talking people through, helping them, setting them up on computers, doing all that kind of thing. There is a, and I'm just throwing out a very small number of the huge things that a library fulfills. For me, libraries are particularly special because I look back now, and I've been told by librarians not to ever describe myself as a feral child who raised himself in libraries. Mostly because they are terrified that people will just sort of start dropping off their children in libraries. But libraries were where I did the majority of my growing up. I would get my parents to drop me off at the library on their way to work, all through any school holidays. And I would read my way through the children's library, and when I did that, read my way through the adult library, which the adult library you can't do alphabetically. There's too much weird stuff in there, discovered. But libraries have always been, for me, a support, a lifeline, and I will go to my death supporting libraries.
Thank you for that. That feels like a great place to wrap it up. And I am incredibly, incredibly thankful for our university libraries and our art museums here because they are amazing. Neil Gaiman, you have been wonderful. We are so thrilled to have you here this year.
Thank you everybody. That was marvelous and well done.
To our audience, thank you. To our overflow room, our virtual audience. And by the way, we hope to see you here next year, right around the same time, to be with us on the same stage with our 2024 St. Louis Literary Award recipient. It is Jamaica Kincaid.